So I just came back from the Until Dawn movie. This isn't going to be a long scripted video about it. I'm going to wait until I have a copy of the movie I can watch, take clips of, do screenshots of, zoom in before I do one of those. But I think a quick review is in order. I find it kind of hilarious that when I saw the trailer, my first thought was, oh, they accidentally made a Dead by Daylight movie. Whoops. So obviously, I was curious to see how the actual movie was going to play. And I was kind of shocked at the extent to which, yeah, that wasn't just a joke. This is a Dead by Daylight movie. It's not like Until Dawn at all. I mean, yeah, there are things there they call Wendigos, but they don't really look like the Wendigos, and they certainly don't move in our iconic Wendigo way, or, you know, they're not evil spirits that possess you when you've eaten human flesh. They're just what happens to people when they have been inside the Dead by Daylight loop for so long that they run out of hope, and then they just become withered husks and turn into monsters. It's interesting because in the world of Dead by Daylight, that's not really a part of their lore as far as I know, but it makes sense as an adaptation to the lore. What does happen to someone when the entity can no longer drain any fear out of them? It makes sense that they would become some kind of a just generic monster. And honestly, had Project T gotten made, I would not have been surprised to see that the zombies wandering around that world were former survivors who had run out of hope. More importantly, though, and I can't stress this part enough, the degree to which the psycho as depicted in the game is just Evan McMillan, the Trapper, is insane. So, yeah, he uses a hammer and a pickaxe because he is mining themed. But of course, Evan McMillan is a miner. Like, that's his thing. He caused a mine collapse that killed 300 people or whatever, and that's why he's cursed to be in the realm forever. So when I see him in the miner's gear, I'm like, that's not the psycho. That's Evan McMillan, the Trapper, wearing a psycho mask cosmetic. Especially because the mask doesn't have the hair. I don't know if it's this way for you, but for me, one of the most iconic parts of the psycho's look is the crazy hair it has. But that's just completely absent here. It's just Evan McMillan, the Trapper, wearing a Josh mask without the hair. Because when you think of the Until Dawn Psycho, you think of how easy he is to injure and the frantic way he fights. Here, he is clearly a Dead by Daylight killer. Not only is he using bear traps, right? But there's a scene where he finds someone hiding in a closet and pulls them out and kills them. Very Dead by Daylight stuff. There's even a moment where he's like faced away from the camera and half looks over his shoulder when he hears a sound, essentially recreating the cover of Dead by Daylight, only the camera's closer to it. But fundamentally, it feels more like a reference to Dead by Daylight than almost any of the references to Until Dawn feel like actual Until Dawn references in this movie. I was surprised because the whole idea, they even state something pretty clearly that's part of Dead by Daylight lore, which is that the evil force that is doing this constantly throws in new monsters in order to make sure that you're not getting used to them and your fear keeps getting turned up because that's what it feeds on. And of course, in the world of Dead by Daylight, we understand that it's the entity doing the feeding. Here, there's no explanation for what's eating the fear. Why does this have to happen? Where is any of this coming from? The closest we have is a speech Dr. Hill gives, because Dr. Hill is the movie's villain. That was a surprise. I mean, it's not a complete surprise. You don't hire Peter Stormare just to play the Harbinger at the start of your horror movie. Although it was nice that they had a Winnebago drive by early in the movie when they're at the gas station to be like a little nod to Cabin in the Woods, because they know how much they owe to Cabin in the Woods. So that was a very nice touch. But even the presence of Dr. Hill here, I mean, as little sense as he makes in the Until Dawn universe, because of course it's just so weird to see Dr. Hill depicted as an evil puppet master, when of course anyone who's played Until Dawn understands that the minorly sinister version of Dr. Hill is a complete creation of Josh's fractured mind. All the evidence we see of the actual Dr. Hill is that he's probably just a pretty, solid physician who's trying to get Josh to not do his evil scheme and take his meds. Seems like a pretty good guy, honestly. But if you think of it in the Dead by Daylight context, there's got to be an Augustine Lieber type figure who is doing experiments, luring people into the fog and doing experiments to find out more about how the entity operates. There had to have been that kind of character. I'm sure someone who knows more about Dead by Daylight lore can say who the Peter Stormare character maps onto, because him being Dr. Hill doesn't make a lick of sense. Oh my God. And then at the end of the movie, they say his next plan is to deal with Josh Washington and his evil schemes in the wintry woods of Alberta. Oh, it was so... I mean, I will say that the one thing that made me truly happy in the entire movie was seeing that. But yeah, my big takeaway, my huge takeaway was this really does feel like someone back in like 2019 or whatever tried to pitch Behavior Interactive a Dead by Daylight movie, and Behavior Interactive said no. And then they just sat on this script, half developed, maybe they fully wrote it. Honestly, there's lines in the movie that make more sense if you're talking about a Dead by Daylight situation, like the fact that they talk about it feeding on fear and needing to constantly have new things to be afraid of. Moments like that feel so much like they were left over from a Dead by Daylight script. It feels like they wrote a Dead by Daylight script and then they couldn't sell it. And then when they found out that Sony was going to be open to making an Until Dawn movie, they said to themselves, how few things do we have to change about this script in order to turn it into an Until Dawn movie? And the result was less than you'd think. Because again, the Wendigos don't really seem like Wendigos. The Psycho mask is just Evan McMillan wearing a cosmetic, and there's nothing else in any way, shape, or form Until Dawn related here. I will say, just as an Until Dawn superfan, I enjoyed seeing a recreation of the Wendigo strapped into a chair escape scene. Although, how interesting is that scene if it then doesn't end with a nurse getting attacked by the Wendigo? If you ask me what I think of it just as a movie, 7 out of 10. Like, solid, accessible horror. I mean, yeah, it's gory, but all of the gore is extremely silly. And as long as you've got a relatively strong stomach, you can just watch it and have fun. This is not a movie that is designed to upset you, to make you particularly tense. It is definitely aiming more to be not a full horror comedy, like Cabin in the Woods or Ready or Not, but definitely if you can handle Cabin in the Woods or Ready or Not, this is absolutely the kind of horror movie you might enjoy. It's far from the top of the genre, but it is definitely a fun watch, and it is pretty well made. I will say I was not impressed by the dialogue. I think it is very clunkily written, and that's not just in comparison to the, let's face it, iconic and wonderful crazy dialogue of Until Dawn, but just like, generally speaking, these are not particularly well-written characters who don't say interesting things. And that is a problem. But let's face it, you're here for the monsters and the kills, and the movie definitely delivers on both fronts. I would absolutely recommend seeing it. I think them trying to go and do a Josh Washington Until Dawn continuing this story is a terrible idea. Since, how do I put this? Until Dawn is about something, and this movie profoundly is not about anything except putting the scares on screen. So I feel like it might devalue it. But if you were hoping for someone to say climbing class, you don't get it. So really, 0 out of 10, I guess. All right. I'm honestly looking forward to seeing it again so I can start picking it apart. Obviously, we all know about the Hartley's gas station. As I said, Josh shows up right at the end of the movie in a file, and then you see the closest they could come to the lodge. But I'm sure there's a bunch of other references in there I missed, especially on the cork board, where there's all sorts of things pinned to it along with the missing poster. So I'm very much looking forward to checking that out. Okay, one last thing. I think the script might have actually been written in 2018 when Dead by Daylight was new, because, and if I'm remembering this wrong, I will apologize, but I think there was a moment when they said that the mine disaster was 20 years ago, and the mine disaster is established as having happened in 1998. So that makes the movie set in 2018, which makes 100% sense as a time for someone to be writing a Dead by Daylight movie. Okay, anyway, I've been the Hidden Object Guru. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time and you'd like to see more of these buttons coming up to help with that, questions, comments, your own thoughts on the Until Dawn movie, go in the comments section below the video. Oh, the other 0 out of 10 moment. We were promised a werewolf and we didn't get a werewolf. Check out my game, which doesn't have a werewolf to be fair, Clown in the Woods on itch.io. We'll see you back here for more Until Dawn videos, but until then, I'll say that's right. Au revoir.